At the very edge of a forgotten village stood the silent forest. It was a place of deep shadows and an even deeper quiet, dark, seemingly endless, and utterly feared. No birds dared to sing within its branches. No wind laughed through its ancient trees. And just beside this ominous wood lived a woman the villagers called a witch. Her name was Elara. She lived a solitary life in a small, weathered hut. Bundles of strange herbs hung from the roof, drying in the still air, and symbols the villagers didn't understand were carved into her door. She was a spectral figure, always wrapped in dark cloaks, and she spoke to no one. Parents warned their children to keep their distance, and the elders would whisper that her eyes, deep and green, could see into the future. But for all their fear, Elara never harmed a soul. She simply existed, listening not to the village gossip, but to the forest itself. One winter night, the sky tore itself open with a violent crack of thunder. Snow didn't fall. It descended like ashes from a dying fire. The crops in the fields froze solid. Farm animals, strong and vital just hours before, collapsed in their sheds. And a primal fear, colder than the ice forming on the windows, wrapped itself around the village. Then, a scream pierced the howling wind. A mother, frantic with terror, ran through the snow-choked streets, her cries echoing off the silent houses. Her child had vanished. He was lost somewhere inside the silent forest. Panic spread like a fever, but no one dared to go after him. The forest was cursed, they all agreed, and the witch Elara belonged to it. They believed she was part of its malevolence. But as the storm raged, growing stronger with every passing minute, desperation began to chip away at their fear. With torches held in shaking hands, a small crowd of villagers made their way to Elara's hut. They approached with a mix of dread and a sliver of hope. As the first man raised his hand to knock, the door swung open before his knuckles could touch the wood. Elara stood there in the doorway, her expression calm, her posture serene, as if she had been waiting for them all along. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried over the storm's fury. "The forest is restless," she said. "A child has crossed its breath." The villagers stared, frozen in place. It wasn't the biting cold that held them captive, but the unnerving certainty in her voice. Without waiting for a plea or a permission, Elara took her gnarled wooden staff and stepped out into the blizzard. The snow seemed to bend away from her feet, refusing to touch her. The wind, which had been screaming, now seemed to whisper her name. She walked into the silent forest, and the darkness itself seemed to shift around her. Trees leaned in as if to listen. Shadows danced and moved where no light could cast them. Elara followed a faint, ethereal path, illuminated only by the struggling moonlight that broke through the storm clouds. She walked until she found it a perfect circle of glowing runes, etched into the frozen ground, pulsing with a soft, otherworldly light. At its center sat the child. He was completely untouched by the cold, his breath pluming in the air, warm and steady. When he saw her, his small lips trembled, but not with fear. "Are you the witch?" he asked, his voice filled with a child's pure curiosity. Elara knelt beside him, her movements graceful and slow. She wrapped him in the heavy warmth of her cloak. "No," she whispered, her voice like the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. "I am the one who keeps the forest from taking more than it should." As she carefully lifted the boy into her arms, the storm began to lose its fury. The glowing runes on the ground faded back into the earth. The forest itself seemed to let out a long, slow breath. By the time morning broke, the sky was clear. Elara returned to the village, the child sleeping peacefully in her arms, safe and warm. The storm had vanished as if it had never been. The thick ice that had coated everything began to melt away under a hopeful sun. In the sheds, animals stirred and rose to their feet. Life, fragile but persistent, was slowly returning. The villagers stood in stunned silence, their torches long since extinguished. The weight of their shame was heavier than the winter cold had ever been. They had feared a guardian, they had demonized a protector, and because of their ignorance, they had nearly lost a child. From that day forward, the silent forest was silent no more. Birds returned to sing in its branches. The wind whispered through its leaves, not with menace, but with gratitude. And Elara was no longer called a witch. The villagers gave her a new name, Protector, and she returned to her home at the edge of the woods, not as an outcast, but as a guardian forever watching, listening, and protecting the fragile, sacred balance between human fear and nature's truth. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to AK Story Tales from the Forgotten Corners of the World.